stand. Trust.
The question was not supposed to matter. Ambassador Vehn Araketh of the Sulhari Dominion had been stationed on Earth for 11 months, and in that time he had catalogued approximately 4,200 human behaviors that he did not fully understand. He maintained a running document on his private terminal, organized by frequency and apparent significance, and he reviewed it periodically the way a careful researcher reviews field notes, not searching for any particular conclusion, simply ensuring that the observations remained accurate and complete. The handshake appeared in the document early. It was common, it was consistent, it was performed across every culture he had encountered on Earth without significant variation in its basic structure. Two individuals extended their right hands, clasped them together briefly, and released. Sometimes they moved the joined hands up and down once or twice. The gesture accompanied greetings and departures and the conclusion of agreements. It was, by any measure of frequency, one of the most significant physical rituals in human social life. Araketh had catalogued it and moved on. He had more pressing matters. The bilateral trade framework review was consuming most of his professional attention, and the technical working groups on resource exchange protocols were 3 months behind schedule, and there were 17 pending formal communications from his home office that he had not yet adequately addressed. The question occurred to him on a Thursday afternoon during a working lunch with Marcus Webb, the senior liaison from Earth's Office of Galactic Affairs, who had been his primary human contact for most of his 11 months on Earth. They had concluded a review of the latest working group reports. Webb had indicated that the session was finished and that his next appointment was in 40 minutes. He had stood up. Araketh had stood up. Webb had extended his right hand. Araketh shook it. He had learned to perform the gesture fluently in his 3rd month. And then, as Webb was gathering his documents, Araketh said, without particularly planning to, "Why do you do that?" Webb paused. "Do what?" Araketh indicated the handshake. Webb looked at his own hand, as though he had not previously given the matter serious consideration. "It's a greeting," he said, "a way of acknowledging the other person's." "There are many ways to acknowledge another person," Araketh said. "Your own culture uses several of them. Why this one? Why the hand specifically? Why physical contact?" Webb set his documents back down on the table. He pulled out his chair and sat back down. "That," he said, "is actually a more interesting question than I expected." Marcus Webb was not a historian, a philosopher, or an anthropologist. He had a background in economics and had spent 12 years in various roles related to Galactic Affairs Administration before becoming the senior liaison to the Sulhari mission. He was practical, organized, and very good at his job, which required a particular kind of intelligence, the intelligence that understood systems and processes and the human relationships that kept them functioning. He also had, which Araketh had observed over 11 months, an unusual willingness to stop and think about things he did not already know the answer to. This was rarer, Araketh had found, than most people believed it to be. "I know the basics," Webb said. "It goes back a very long time, thousands of years. There are different theories about where it started." "What are they?" Webb thought for a moment. "One theory is that it began as a way of showing that you weren't holding a weapon. You extend your open hand, your dominant hand, the one you'd use to hold a sword or a knife, and you show the other person that it's empty, that you come without threat." Araketh considered this a signal of non-aggression. "At origin, yes, probably," Webb paused. "But that's not what it means now, or not only what it means, it's evolved. The meaning has accumulated." "What has it accumulated?" Webb looked at the table for a moment. He had the expression Araketh associated with him doing genuine thinking rather than retrieving information he already had. "Trust," Webb said finally. That's the core of what it's about now, I think. You extend your hand to someone and they take it, both of you are in contact, both of you have given up a small amount of physical security, and that shared moment of mutual vulnerability is a kind of contract. You're both choosing to trust each other enough to do it. It's a tiny thing, but it's real. You can feel it when someone's handshake is genuine and when it isn't. You can feel honesty through physical contact. You can feel intention, attention, whether someone is actually present in the moment with you or thinking about something else. Webb paused. I know that sounds imprecise. It doesn't, Araketh said. It sounds very precise. Precision O. F a kind that formal language is not designed to carry. Webb looked at him. Araketh had not intended the observation as anything significant. It had simply been accurate. But he saw something shift in Webb's expression, a small recognition of something, and he found himself wanting to understand what Webb had just thought. What was that? Araketh asked. What was what? The thing you just thought. When I said formal language is not designed to carry that kind of precision. Webb was quiet for a moment. I was thinking, he said slowly, about how many of the problems we've had in the working groups this year have been about exactly that. Things that formal language doesn't carry well. We write an instrument that says one thing and you read an instrument that says the same thing, and somehow we come out of it with different understandings. Because the thing the instrument is supposed to capture, the actual intention, the actual relationship, the actual trust, didn't make it into the document. The room was quiet. Outside, through the large windows of the liaison building, the city moved through its ordinary Thursday afternoon. Tell me more about the handshake, Araketh said. Webb canceled his next appointment. He called a colleague he trusted, a cultural historian from one of the major universities who had spent her career studying gesture and ritual in human societies. And she came to the liaison building within the hour and sat across from Araketh and explained, carefully and in detail, everything she knew about the history of the handshake. Her name was Dr. Elena Vasquez, and she had the quality that Araketh had noticed in the best academics he had encountered. She was genuinely excited by the question rather than by the performance of answering it. She began, as Webb had, with the weapon theory. She confirmed that it was the most widely cited origin hypothesis, though she was careful to note that the historical evidence was incomplete and that all origin theories for gestures this old involved significant inference. Then she moved forward through time. The handshake had been documented in ancient human civilizations across multiple continents, in some cases independently, which suggested that the impulse it expressed was not culturally specific, but arose from something more fundamental in human social psychology. Treaties and agreements had been sealed with it. Friendships had been formalized through it. In certain historical periods, it had carried specific meanings that were now largely lost. A clasped hand depicted in stone carvings 2,000 years old was not identical in meaning to the gesture performed in a modern government building, but the through line was visible. Physical contact, Dr. Vasquez explained, occupied a specific position in human social cognition that was distinct from every other form of communication. Humans were a tactile species in a way that was not universally true of the intelligent species that had achieved galactic contact. Touch activated physiological responses, hormonal, neurological, that other forms of communication did not reliably produce. These responses were associated with trust building, with the reduction of threat assessment activity, with the neurological states associated with genuine connection. When two humans shake hands, she said, there is a small moment of shared physical reality, not symbolic shared reality, not communicative shared reality, actual physical reality. You are both touching the same thing at the same time. Your nervous systems are both registering the same event. Araketh said, this is not true of your formal diplomatic language. No, she said, it is profoundly not true of formal diplomatic language. What is formal diplomatic language designed to do if it does not create shared physical reality? She paused. It's designed to be precise, unambiguous, binding. Is it effective at those things? Dr. Vasquez glanced at Webb. Webb had a slight, careful expression that was not quite a smile. It is effective at appearing to be those things, she said. Whether it actually achieves them depends on whether the parties share a sufficiently common understanding of what the words mean. And that understanding, the actual shared meaning beneath the formal language, is created by the relationship, by the trust, by the history of interaction. She paused. The document is the record of an agreement. The handshake is the agreement. Araketh sat with that for a moment. In 11 months, he said, I have shaken hands with approximately 300 humans. I was instructed that it was a greeting gesture and that performing it would be interpreted as respectful. I performed it as instructed. I did not know what I was doing. The room was very quiet. What were you doing? He asked. What followed was not a scheduled meeting. It was not a formal diplomatic session. It was not anything that would appear in the official record of the Solhari mission's activities on Earth. It was a conversation, a long one. It ran through the afternoon and into the early evening, and at some point Webb ordered food for all three of them and nobody suggested that they might stop. Araketh asked questions, not the questions he asked in formal sessions, structured, purposeful, designed to advance specific institutional objectives. Questions that came from genuine curiosity, which was a different thing, and which produced a different quality of answer. He asked Dr. Vasquez how human children learn to shake hands, at what age, under what circumstances, what they understood about it when they were first taught it, and whether that understanding changed over time. She told him children were taught the gesture early, usually framed as politeness, a social protocol, a learned behavior. But something happened between the taught behavior and the adult behavior, she said. The adult version carried meaning that the child's version didn't, not because the gesture changed, but because the human nervous system that performed it had accumulated enough experience to understand, at a level below conscious articulation, what the moment of contact was actually doing. Adults who shake hands badly know they're doing it badly, she said, even if they can't explain why. The gesture has become a form of communication sophisticated enough that it carries signal. Araketh asked Webb when he had first understood this, when he had crossed from the learned behavior to the genuine communication. Webb's thought about it for a long time. There was a negotiation, he said finally, early in my career, a very difficult one, not galactic, just two parties with a legitimate dispute and a lot of bad history. I was a junior member of the facilitation team. We'd been at it for 2 weeks and nothing was moving. And then on the 14th day, at the end of a session, the two principals shook hands when they said goodbye. Standard courtesy. But I watched it happen, and I knew, I can't tell you how I knew, but I knew that something had shifted. The agreement came 3 days later, and I realized afterward that the shift had happened in that moment. The handshake was the agreement. Everything after was paperwork. Araketh was quiet. The Solhari do not have a gesture like this, he said. I know, Webb said. Our formal communication systems are very sophisticated. They are precise and comprehensive, and they have been refined over 3,000 years of diplomatic practice. As I know, they do not have a mechanism for the thing you are describing. I know, Webb said, for the third time. And then he said something he had clearly been thinking about for a while. We've had 14 months of working group sessions, and we are 3 months behind schedule, and the technical instruments are very precise, and neither side seems to agree on what they mean. And I think this conversation might be the reason why. The next morning, Araketh sent a message to his home office. It was not a standard communication. It did not follow the format of the routine reports he filed monthly, or the formal diplomatic instruments he transmitted when negotiations reached decision points. It was a personal communication to his direct superior, Ambassador Primary Thesson Vorel, who had appointed him to the Earth posting and who had, over 15 years of working together, developed enough trust with Araketh to receive the kind of message that did not follow standard formats. Araketh wrote that he had spent the previous day in an unscheduled conversation with two humans, and that the conversation had produced an understanding of something he had been observing for 11 months without correctly interpreting. He wrote that this misinterpretation was likely affecting the working group negotiations, and that he wanted permission to attempt an adjustment to the process that would be unusual and might be resisted by the more protocol-focused members of his team. Vorel's response arrived 4 hours later. It was 3 words. "What did you learn?" Araketh wrote back at length. He described the handshake. He described what Dr. Vasquez had explained about touch and trust and shared physical reality. He described what Webb had said about the document being the record of an agreement while the handshake was the agreement itself. He described what he had come to understand about the gap between formal communication, however sophisticated, and the substrate of actual trust that made formal communication function. He wrote, "We have been trying to build the structure without the foundation. The humans have a ritual that creates the foundation. We have been performing it for 11 months as a courtesy gesture while missing entirely what it was doing." Vorel's second response arrived in 2 hours. It was longer. It said, "This is the most interesting report I have received from any posting in 30 years. See. Antanu, what do you propose?" What Araketh proposed was not revolutionary. He was careful about that. He had spent enough time in diplomacy to understand that revolutionary proposals were usually wrong, and that the most durable changes came from small adjustments made thoughtfully rather than large reorganizations made dramatically. He proposed 3 things. First, that the working group sessions begin with an unstructured period, 30 minutes, no agenda, no formal language, no instruments, in which the human and Salhari participants simply talked, not about the working group topics, about anything else. The purpose was not to build friendship, though friendship was not unwelcome. The purpose was to establish repeatedly and consistently the thing that the handshake established: shared presence, mutual attention. The small but real experience of being in the same moment as another mind. Second, that at key points in the formal sessions, when a significant instrument was being signed, when an agreement was being recorded, the parties physically shake hands, not as ceremony, not as protocol, as the actual act of agreement. Araketh would instruct his team in what the gesture actually meant. The humans already knew. Third, and most unusually, that Araketh request a private conversation with each of the senior human working group leads, not about the working group topics, but about whatever they wanted to talk about. An hour each. No agenda. He would ask questions and he would listen, and he would not attempt to advance any institutional objective. He would simply be present. His deputy, a careful and conventional man named Sekundar Reth Alanis, reviewed the proposal and said that he understood the first 2 elements but not the third. "What is the institutional purpose of the private conversations?" Alanis asked. "There is no institutional purpose," Araketh said. "That is the point." Alanis looked at him. "The humans have a concept," Araketh said, "that they call knowing someone. It is distinct from knowing about someone. It involves sustained, genuine attention over time in circumstances that are not structured around any particular objective. The conversations I am proposing are not a diplomatic tool. They are an attempt to know the people I have been working with as opposed to knowing their institutional roles and positions." "And you believe this will affect the negotiations?" "I believe it will affect everything," Araketh said. "Yes." The first change anyone noticed was not in the formal sessions. It was in the hallways. The Salhari delegation occupied 2 floors of the liaison building, and the human working group leads occupied adjacent space. And for 11 months the 2 groups had inhabited this proximity with the careful, courteous distance of professionals who respected each other's boundaries. Nods in the corridor. brief exchanges about schedules and logistics, the specific quality of politeness that exists between people who work together without quite working together. 3 weeks after Araketh's adjustment began, the hallways were different. Two Salhari technical specialists and the head of the Human Infrastructure Working Group were in conversation by the lifts one morning about, as best anyone could determine, a sport that one of the Salhari had recently discovered and found inexplicably compelling. The Human Working Group lead was explaining the rules. The Salhari specialists were asking questions. None of them appeared to be in any hurry. Webb noticed this and said nothing about it, because he had learned over 12 years of galactic affairs work that some things were better observed than discussed. In the formal sessions, the change was slower, but it was there. The 30-minute unstructured periods were awkward at first. Nobody quite knew what to do with time that had no objective, and there was a period of about 2 weeks during which both sides defaulted to polite, meaningless small talk that was slightly worse than silence would have been. But the awkwardness passed, as awkwardness does when it is not interrupted, and what replaced it was something more genuine. The Salhari participants began asking questions they would not have asked in formal sessions. Not political questions, human questions. What did the human participants do when they were not working? What had they wanted to be when they were young? What did they think about when they were not thinking about the working group? The human participants asked questions back. The conversations were imperfect and incomplete, and sometimes produced more misunderstanding than understanding in the short term. But they were real, and the realness of them carried into the formal sessions in a way that precision instruments had never managed to carry anything. By the 8th week, the working groups were 6 weeks ahead of schedule. The agreement was signed on a morning in late spring. It was a comprehensive instrument, Roman 900 pages of technical specification and legal framework and protocol, the product of 14 months of original negotiation and 2 months of accelerated progress. It was precise and unambiguous and binding in all the ways that formal diplomatic documents are supposed to be precise and unambiguous and binding. At the signing, after all the official procedures had been completed and the formal record had been made, Araketh turned to Webb. He extended his right hand. Webb took it. The handshake lasted 3 seconds, which was slightly longer than the standard duration, long enough to be felt, short enough to be appropriate. Araketh said nothing, neither did Webb. There was nothing to say, the thing had been said. Later, walking back to his office through the corridors of the liaison building, Araketh stopped and wrote a brief note in his running document. The document that had catalogued 4,200 human behaviors he did not fully understand. He moved the handshake from the general catalog to a separate section he created for that purpose. He labeled the section "What I Misunderstood." Then he labeled it more accurately, "What I Was Not Yet Ready to Understand." The report Araketh filed at the end of his posting ran to 240 pages. It covered trade framework outcomes, protocol revisions, technical specifications, personnel assessments, and the standard range of topics that a senior mission posting was expected to document. The section on cultural observations was 31 pages long, which was approximately 25 pages longer than any comparable section in any Salhari mission report previously filed from any posting. The section on the handshake was 7 pages. It was read in the years that followed by approximately 300 senior Salhari diplomatic personnel, not because it was required reading, but because it circulated among them the way that genuinely useful things circulate person to person, without announcement, passed along with the quiet endorsement of being considered worth passing along. The report was eventually translated, with Araketh's permission, into 6 other galactic languages. In 2 of those languages there was no existing word for the thing the report was describing, the specific quality of mutual vulnerability that made the gesture function, and new words had to be coined. The words were adopted into common usage within a decade. In the Sulhari Dominion, the handshake itself was not adopted. The Sulhari were not humans, and the gesture did not translate directly into their physical and social repertoire. But the concept, the idea that genuine agreement required something that formal language could not carry, something that lived below the level of precision instruments in the space of actual shared attention, that translated. It informed how Sulhari diplomatic training was revised. It informed how Sulhari negotiators were taught to think about the difference between the record of an agreement and the agreement itself. It did not solve every problem. Nothing solved every problem. The working group still had difficult sessions. The bilateral framework still generated disputes. The careful, slow, imperfect work of building understanding between civilizations that had evolved on different worlds, under different conditions, with different histories and different nervous systems. That work did not get easier because of what one ambassador had learned on a Thursday afternoon in a liaison building. But it got more honest. And honesty, as Webb had once told a junior colleague who had asked him how galactic diplomacy actually worked, was not a diplomatic strategy. It was the only alternative to the kind of precision that looked like understanding while quietly failing to be it. Araketh's final act before leaving Earth was to visit Dr. Vasquez. He went to her office at the university, which was the kind of office that accumulated the evidence of a life spent thinking, books that had been read rather than displayed, notes that had been written rather than filed, the specific organized disorder of a mind that moved faster than its administrative systems. She was expecting him. She offered coffee, which he had learned over 11 months to drink without making the expression he had initially made when he first tasted it. He told her about the report, about the section on the handshake, about the new words that had been coined in 2 galactic languages. She listened with the attentiveness he had come to associate with her, fully present, not performing attention but actually paying it. "Was that what you expected?" she asked, "when you canceled your appointment that afternoon and sat back down?" "I did not have expectations," he said. "I had a question." "Which you still have." He considered this. "I understand the handshake better than I did," he said. "I understand what it does and why it works and what the 11 months of perfo. Reaming it incorrectly cost us in the working groups, but I don't think I understand it the way you understand it, the way Webb understands it, not yet." "What would you need?" "More time," he said, "more practice, more moments of actually performing the gesture rather than executing the protocol." He paused. "I think it is the kind of thing that is understood slowly, through repetition and attention rather than through explanation." Dr. Vasquez smiled. "That's true of most things worth understanding." He stood to leave. She stood with him. He extended his right hand. She took it. It lasted 3 seconds. It was genuine on both sides in the way that the 11 months of courtesy handshakes had not been genuine, and the difference was felt by both of them. "Thank you," he said, "for the answer." "You asked a good question," she said. He left her office and walked through the university and out into the morning, which was clear and cool. The sky the particular pale blue that Earth's atmosphere produced in certain light conditions, and that he had not seen anywhere else in the galaxy. He thought about the question he had asked on a Thursday afternoon that he had not particularly planned to ask. He thought about where questions came from, the real ones, the ones that mattered, and whether they came from curiosity or from some deeper form of attention that was below curiosity. That was simply the act of watching something closely enough and long enough that its true shape began to become visible. He thought about what 300 humans had understood and passed along to each other without instruction, in a gesture so ordinary that most of them had stopped noticing they were doing it. He put his right hand in his pocket. It felt different than it had before. He walked toward the transport and the life that came after Earth, and the long, slow, imperfect work of trying to bring back what he had learned.